Imagine if you're Jacob Couch's wife and you were living in Los Angeles so you can cope with the loss of your son who died because he was stillborn. And then you decide to travel back home to Arab, Alabama. And while you're waiting to depart, a random Negro with a hatchet comes and attacks your husband, first sending him into a state of brain damage, and then ultimately he loses his life in Los Angeles. And while in the midst of dealing with this, the news that surrounds the public sphere is that white people are the ones hunting Negroes. That all the issues of the world of the Negro is because of white people hunting them in their racism. And then you see other people who've killed whites, like Karmelo Anthony, getting his barn reduced and living in a gated community around white people like he did before, because he too realizes the danger, or I should say, he and his family realizes the danger of living around Negroes. And when you have hundreds of thousands of dollars, you want to live around white people in a gated community so you can drive safely in the new car that you bought with the money that you got from crowdfund to celebrate the murder of yet another white. Now, I give this detailed sort of narrative explanation to highlight why it would make sense if Jacob Couch's wife, whose name is Kristen, by the way, it would make sense why someone like her would become a Klansman and would want to be a part of a reinvigorated Ku Klux Klan like how it was in the late 1800s and early 90s. Because what you also notice on social media, and it's easy to find, a number of people celebrating what took place. Maybe not so much of her husband, but I'm sure you could find it. But celebrating Carmelo Anthony or any white that has been terrorized while simultaneously playing the victim, which is unfortunately normal conversation, because I know since I've been alive, the regular narrative through the mainstream media, through the government, is that Negroes are the ones being terrorized by interracial crime, despite the evidence to the contrary. And the reason why these sort of things are also a concern, and not just for so-called white people, is because when you have Negroid savages or so-called minorities being covered for, being defended, being highly praised, despite the vast amounts of negativity that they contribute to society, is that those very same people don't just make white people's life a living hell, but the entire society's life a living hell as well. So, for instance, when you have someone that's considered a minority, like an illegal, rape, rob, and kill, it could very well be someone that's non-white that's a victim. And we know the majority of victims by the hands of so-called black folks or other black folks. And so, that should further highlight how, as much as I harp on the white liberal and so-called white people in general utterly racially cucking themselves and willingly sacrificing themselves to people who hate them, well, Negroes are no different, since they defend the savages of the community. But also imagine a trans shooter, another minority. We know how they often get protected. And despite the many number of these trans activists that make terrorist threats, they aren't made targets. The criminal targets as they deserved. And it's all based on their protected minority status. But the main point here is this constant instigating and antagonizing that you see with the laundry list of interracial crimes, which are mostly black on white, while simultaneously the mainstream media and the government pushing the opposite narrative, that it's white supremacy that rules today. And then you have all of these braggarts boasting and cheerleading how Karmelo and his family is getting all this cash. Just like not too long ago, BLM got away with causing billions of dollars of property damage and costing the lives of several people, or more than several, in the double digits. That's the amount of people that were ended during that. And then you see their so-called leadership being rewarded with multi-million-dollar mansions. It's like all of this would cause any sensible, sane, normal person to want to do something about it, to say the least. To stop these celebrations, to stop the bragging and the antagonizing permanently. Because if there truly was a reinvigorating of the Klan and it dished out the behavior that history said it did and the perceptions of history, then you know what? It would be all well earned and well deserved. I personally would just hope it, targeted the people that make it known what they would like to do to whites and any other group that they boast and brag about tormenting. Because when they're not bragging and boasting about tormenting whites, you didn't have the feminist contingent amongst these psychos that brag and boast about terrorizing particularly heterosexual men, calling them things like incels and deeming the manosphere in a negative way. And so, between so-called white people and the heterosexual men, no matter their so-called race, these kinds of people that cheerlead these sorts of things, I mean, if karma is real, then they have more than enough karma that they deserve. And me personally, I hope stories like Jacob's and especially Austin's just doesn't get buried among the many other stories. Because otherwise, this sort of thing will keep happening. And quite frankly, I don't care to live in a country that is either ruled by so-called minorities or ruled based on the ideology that minorities are so-called victims in this country. Because under that type of rule, we end up with America becoming a third world country. And that's just the reality of it. And plus, again, when it comes to Negroes running anything, we've seen plenty of examples of how that doesn't usually go too well. Whether it be an entire country like these African countries, And I'm talking about African countries that have little to no European or Western world uh, aid. Those type of countries are hell to live in. Or if they're given authority and rulership in a Western country, like a judge, a district attorney, a mayor, a governor, senator, we see how they F that up as well. Which really makes you call into question the whole idea of, Black Wall Street and those, you know, black towns that you hear were somehow successfully ran. I mean, like Negroes are just so bad now. It makes you think that all of those stories from the past that were good, or the ones that were good, they make it seem like they were myths. But it is possible those people were somewhat different, because you can say the same for whites. You see how racially cucked the whites are today, and it makes you think that those, crusaders of the past, I mean, those stories must be myth. Because how could they have descended from them to become what they are today? A bunch of scared cucked bastards. So, I mean, it is possible that, with a few generations, entire people's mentality and behavior can have a drastic shift. But anyway, Negroes should be embarrassed by this, but as we know, most Negroes are shameless, which is why we have stories like Jacob Couch being ignored while Negroes claim to be the ones hunted. Because again, they were at a bus stop. He kneeled down to pick up their bags, and that's when the hatchet came down on his neck. That's a true hunted story. And then the Karmelo money that's coming in, and how they're just shamelessly spending it extravagantly. I mean, you think it would have been a wake-up call following the BLM riots of 2020, the George Floyd riots of 2020, and how they demonized Cal Rittenhouse and Daniel Penny. I think those four stories alone would have been a wake-up call that it's a one-sided race war happening, whether you like it or not. Because a lot of these people who would sympathize with Jacob and Austin still like to believe that others, particularly the POCs, care about justice, the rules, fairness, the law, and not just be on this tribal bullshit, but only be tribal to celebrate an interracial crime happening when they feel like, their side won because the other side member is dead. Because any other time, as we know with Negroes, there is no unity. You can't get any attention drawn towards some Negro executing a 4-year-old black girl. I mean, just makes me think of George Floyd's niece, who was shot. Wasn't killed, but shot. And as much as attention George Floyd got, you think, well, an innocent 4-year-old related to him, they treat him like a messiah. They would surely treat her extra special if something happened to her. It did, but the reason why it was silent, because it wasn't someone white that shot her. So it really is just unity under devilish acts. And again, this is a mentality that doesn't just come from criminal blacks, that have records or have done things and haven't been caught yet. No, I'm talking about blacks that have never committed a crime, officially or unofficially, a day in their lives, they will still be like the criminal blacks and show unity for chaos. But anyway, that's all I have to say about this.